Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our second edition of Higher Education Talks. On today's session, Sarah Fink will be presenting the Athena Swan Charter. My name is Mónica Angulo. I am project manager at British Council Mexico, where we're leading several projects related to gender equality in higher education institutions. So for those who are not familiar to the British Council, we are an international organization for cultural relations between the UK and countries worldwide. And we support peace and prosperity by building connections, understanding, and trust. Gender equality is a very important part of what we do as cultural relations organizations that promotes equality, diversity, and inclusion as core values. So this is a new initiative, HE Talks, that started in September of this year with the aim of opening conversations with experts about the latest trends in higher education, including internationalization, transnational education or TNE, gender equality in higher education institutions, and women participation in STEM. And this initiative complements our efforts to establish communities of practice in Mexico, supporting gender equality in higher education institutions and other activities under our flagship program, Women Mentors in Science. But before we get into the content of today's session, I would like to highlight that the British Council has a safeguarding policy that we put in place in everything we do. We aim to create a safe environment in which no one will be experience any harm, any abuse, or any kind of exploitation during your contact with us. So for more information about our safeguarding policy, please use the QR code displayed on the screen. Please also keep in mind that this session is being recorded and will be available in our Facebook and YouTube channel afterwards. You are also welcome and encouraged to post your comments and questions in the Q&A box. So today I have the pleasure to present Sarah Fink, who will introduce us to Athena Swan Higher Education Charter, that is used to support and transform gender equality, diversity, and inclusion within higher education institutions and research around the world. Sarah Fink is head of Athena Swan Ireland at Advance HE. She has expertise in supporting sector-wide and institutional progress on gender equality. She works with Irish higher education institutions and relevant external agencies, including the Higher Education Authority. She also worked at an Irish university with the responsibility for developing and implementation of EDI strategy and action plans and supporting academic departments to apply for Athena Swan Ireland Awards. She previously led on research activity for think tanks and was responsible for building partnerships in academia, business, and government, and authoring research reports on gender equality and inclusion themes. So she will be presenting for the next 30 to 40 minutes, and we will leave the last 10 minutes of the session to take questions from the audience. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction. Oh, yes, I will start by sharing my slides. Hopefully you can see those okay. So yes, as mentioned, my name is Sarah Fink and I am head of Athena Swan Ireland at Advance HE. And I am going to talk about Athena Swan's role in transforming gender equality in higher education and research institutions in different countries. And as mentioned, because I work in Ireland, a lot of my reflections will be on the Charter in Ireland, but I'm also going to draw on some experiences of the Charter frameworks in other countries as well. So I'll start with a little bit of background, and I should start with, I guess, an explanation of who we are at Advance HE. So we're a member-led charity that works with partners around the world to improve higher education for staff, for students, and society. And some of our strategic goals include enhancing confidence and trust in higher ed, addressing systemic inequalities, and of course, supporting the work of our members and the HE sector more broadly. And one of the ways that we do this is through our program of equality charters, one of which is Athena Swan. And at its core, Athena Swan, it's essentially a framework. It's a framework for addressing inequalities. It's underpinned by a commitment to a set of sector-wide shared principles, and it's based on a methodology of self-assessment, action planning, and continuous progression. And I'll say a little bit more about what self-assessment looks like and means to us, and share some more details about the action planning component as well. Awards are then conferred to institutions, and those recognize steps on a journey in addressing inequalities, and those award recommendations are made by peer review panels. A lot of questions, or often we get questions about where the name came from, Athena Swan. It's kind of a funny name, and it doesn't actually have anything to do with swans or birds. But if we go back a few years, there was the Athena Project, which worked to support the advancement of women in science, engineering, and technology, and to encourage and recognize good practice. And then there was the Scientific Women's Academic Network. So that's where the SWAN comes from. And they developed a charter which aimed to complement some of the existing higher education policies and practices. They wanted to have a way to enable institutions to formally pledge support and develop gender equality actions, and then also make sure that they had a framework that could inform policy and practice in a more bottom-up way. So drawing upon the voices of staff and students to help drive that culture change. There are what we often say about the Athena Swan Charter and our wider equality charters is that they are globally comparable but locally contextualized. And in that global comparability, they all share some different, or they share some similar aims, which relate to having a transformative change in EDI across higher education and research. They aim to establish this evidence-based peer review and accreditation system. They work to develop data frameworks to help guide benchmarking, inform action, and measure impact. And they also create these communities of good practice. So in the countries we work, but between those countries as well. So on the screen here, I have the logos of various iterations of Athena Swan and equality charter frameworks that we've been involved in. So first, Athena Swan, which started in the UK. So following that work of the Athena Project and the Scientific Women's Academic Network, Athena Swan was established in the UK in 2005, and its main aim was around supporting the progression and retention of female academics in STEM disciplines in higher education institutions. And the charter's really evolved over time. It was opened up to independent research institutions. Academic departments and professional units could also apply for awards. Its discipline remit has expanded to include arts, humanities, social sciences, business, and law, to look at all staff groups, so not just academics, and take a broader, more intersectional approach to how it addresses gender equality as well. So about 10 years on from that, we had some other charter programs launch as well. So there's the Race Equality Charter in the UK, which is modeled after Athena Swan and of course focuses on race equality. And then we also had the launch of Athena Swan in Ireland. So Athena Swan in Ireland is kind of modeled after Athena Swan in the UK, but has also had its own journey. So like the UK iteration of the charter, started as a focus on the retention of women academics in STEM disciplines, but has evolved to be broader than that and looks to build capacity across additional and intersecting equality grounds as well for all staff and all disciplines. We have SAGE in Australia, which is similar to Athena Swan. We have a framework in Brazil, the Gender Equality Framework, which is a pilot program to establish a framework that could be used to develop an award system like we have in the UK and Ireland and Australia. There's Sea Change in the US. There's Dimensions in Canada, which is similar to Athena Swan, focuses on particular staff cohorts in higher education institutions, but addresses issues of inequity for 5 equity-seeking groups that's linked to Canadian legislation. There's GEDI in India, which was some work we did with the British Council there for looking at gender inequality in STEM disciplines in higher education there. And then just as of within the last year, we have been piloting with a group of institutions in Cyprus to launch Athena Swan Cyprus, which is a framework that looks quite similar to Athena Swan Ireland. So in their global comparability and that they have similar aims, they have similar approaches as well. So all of the charters are founded on a set of shared principles that are adapted for each country, but they feel broadly similar across each sector. They're all grounded in self-assessment. So institutions or departments that are taking part establish self-assessment teams, and those self-assessment teams will collect data and develop this data-driven evidence base. They'll consult with the campus community to capture feedback on how things are going, to get a better sense of sort of the lived experience on campus. They all work to establish an action plan that is implemented and evaluated over time. And then there's that peer review process that I mentioned already, which helps enhance the effectiveness of the charters. One thing that I often hear from applicants of Athena Swan is how helpful the feedback can be in terms of ensuring that institutions are kind of on the right track with their equality work, but also sometimes in institutions it can be really hard to get particular equality initiatives over the line. And when there's that kind of peer support or that peer identification of a challenge, institutions then might be more kind of willing to listen to kind of further activity that might need to be implemented. Alongside the comparability is the local contextualization of each equality charter. And this is really important for ensuring that the charters are effective in their country and tailored to the needs of that particular sector and the sector's context. So I won't say a lot about the kind of contextualization of the different ways that they operate. So some of them we own and operate within Advance AG through a membership model. Sometimes we work with a funding agency or the British Council in a particular country. It really depends on kind of the size of the sector and the funding available and just sort of the appetite for delivery. But what you might find maybe more interesting is that the focus and award system that's contextualized. So for example, each charter will determine the equality areas that they want to focus on. Athena Swan retains a gender lens across each iteration of the framework, but depending on the equality legislation or particular priority areas of a sector, they also look at other equality grounds or other protected characteristics or other themes. They'll also determine what cohort of staff and students they want to focus on. As I mentioned, often they might start with academic and research staff and over time include professional staff as well. Sometimes they include everybody at the start. It can just depend. And again, the discipline focus. So sometimes institutions taking part in Athena Swan focus on STEM disciplines where the kind of leaky pipeline of women in academic roles is most pronounced, but other times, those issues are relevant for all disciplines, and so they'll focus on everyone. The themes, the data sets can also be contextualized, and I'll talk about some of the key common themes that we see. But again, each sector, each institution may have very particular themes that they want to capture with regards to identifying their equality challenges and opportunities. Each charter has a measure of progress. So most often we see the institutions will work their way up through bronze, silver, and gold levels of award, which are all tied to particular criteria. But again, different countries will take different approaches for how they want to reward and recognize progress and success. And then sometimes it's the whole institution that applies for an award. But again, there are iterations of the charter where an academic department or faculty might apply for its own award. I'll say a little bit more now about some of those shared comparable aspects of the charter. So I said how all of the charters are underpinned by a commitment to a set of principles. The principles are really important because they act as the foundation for the charter and all of the other elements of the framework, the application form itself, how it's assessed, align to these commitments. Again, they're globally comparable, so they're kind of this connection piece, but they also encapsulate the core objectives of the charter. Gender equality work and EGI work in our institutions can be really varied. There's sometimes I think it feels like an endless amount of work to do. And the principles can really help focus and structure the work, kind of enable people to know maybe what they need to prioritize to have a clear impact. They're also a useful way for institutions to highlight and signal that they have made an ongoing commitment to addressing inequalities as well. So the charter framework uses a methodology of self-assessment, action, and progress. And what we mean by this is that institutions are required to undertake a critical reflection. So they collect gender equality and inequality data. So they look at their staff population and various themes. They review policies and practices to see if they're fit for purpose or perhaps kind of missing relevant policies and practices. And it also takes into account that consultation piece. So very often that collection of data is complemented by a staff survey or focus groups with particular cohorts of staff and students. Institutions then establish priority areas that are rooted in evidence, derived from the self-assessment where they want to aim for progress and impact. So for example, institutions applying for an Athena Swan Ireland Award are expected to identify 5 gender equality priorities and then 5 additional priority areas that will help them build capacity across additional and intersecting equality grounds as well. All institutions taking part develop a SMART action plan, and that specific, measurable, and achievable, relevant, and time-bound action plan is usually developed for either 4 or 5 years, depending on the framework. And during that time, it's expected that institutions will evaluate how things are going, understand what's working and what isn't, and then those awards are time-bound. So they're valid for usually 5 years, but there have been different timeframes depending on the framework. And at that point, institutions need to reapply. So either renew their award at the same level or upgrade. So it enables this continuous cycle of self-assessment and action. Some of the typical themes and data sets captured as part of the charter framework include governance and leadership. So for example, looking at the gender balance of executive management teams and academic councils or senate or other key decision-making committees in institutions. They look at the population data. So often that classic leaky pipeline of female academic staff, but also perhaps kind of staff by pay grade or other cohorts within the population. They'll collect data on recruitment and career progression. So often our institutions are analyzing the applications and success rates for different roles across the institution. They look at career development and workload. So workload's a really important theme for our institutions, understanding not only kind of how workload aligns to people's career aspirations and that balance of teaching versus research versus service activity, but also just how much workload people have, whether or not the EDI work that they're doing is appropriately rewarded and recognized. It's a really kind of multifaceted aspect of the framework. They also look at family leave uptake and supports for family leave and maybe supports when someone's returning from leave, flexible working opportunities and uptake, and also reporting around unfair treatment and discrimination. And then, of course, capturing through the consultation the perceptions and the experiences related to these and how those affect culture. So to take an example, an institution might provide some reporting, some data on formal reporting related to unfair treatment, but they'd want to do some consultation with staff as well to understand why they would or wouldn't report something, whether or not the policies are fit for purpose, and get a sense of the trust and confidence they have in an institution to take action if necessary. The institution application framework will be linked to particular award levels. So institutions will be applying for bronze, silver, or gold, depending on what stage they're in. And at bronze, it's about demonstrating that they have the structures in place to recognize equality work, that they're identifying their key issues, and they have that initial action plan. If they have aspirations to upgrade to silver, they need to show progress and success. So our Irish applicants would need to show that they have had impact across 2 priority areas to be eligible for silver. And then at gold, so we have 2 gold institutions in the UK now, and they've been able to demonstrate not just that bronze and silver criteria, but that they are sector leaders, and they're also supporting others to improve as well. So now that you have a bit of background about what the frameworks look like, I do want to go into some of the changes that we've seen as a result of Athena Swan. And I'm going to draw upon the UK, Ireland, and Australia as an example, because we've had the UK up and running for 20 years and have had a couple of independent impact reviews. And then with Ireland and Australia coming up to their 10-year anniversaries, I think it's a good time to take stock of where the sector is at. But before I go into the specific examples, I think it's just to provide a little bit of reflection on why I think Athena Swan works and what we've seen from any impact reviews. I think the first is that it's created by and for the higher education community. So there are other accreditation programs that exist around EDI, but because Athena Swan is created specifically for higher education and research, it can really capture some of the nuances and some of the specific challenges that we see in higher ed. Additionally, the evolution of the frameworks are co-developed with the sector. So I mentioned kind of the trajectory of Athena Swan, having often started as focusing on women academics and STEM, but then growing to include the whole campus community and look at other intersecting equality characteristics as well. But we work directly with the sector to make sure that evolution is kind of meeting the sector where it's at and meeting the sector's needs appropriately. It's often led and championed by senior academics. I think that's really helpful because they're the ones that will be leading self-assessment teams, but often they're the ones that approach us to run Athena Swan in that country or bring some sort of iteration of Athena Swan to that country in the first place. So in Ireland, for example, was a group of women academics who had seen this kind of the success of Athena Swan in the UK and felt that the sector needed something similar. Off the back of some very public cases of discrimination and just the kind of continued issues with the lack of women in senior academic roles across the sector. I think because it requires that thorough self-assessment and reflection, it helps institutions understand their own individual data and challenges and really take ownership. So often what we see are, sector-wide, societal-wide issues, but institutions will have kind of their own unique localized challenges that they need to respond to within their own context. The staff consultation piece and engagement is really useful as well. It can give a voice to people who haven't maybe been listened to before in their institution. It's an opportunity for them to just share their own lived experience, and institutions to design initiatives and introduce interventions targeted to that experience. Because awards are only valid for a fixed amount of time, it means institutions can't just get the award and say, that's it, we've sorted gender equality. They're required to show progress over time and have to renew or upgrade their award. And that peer review process, which I've spoken a little bit about already, our panels are made up of a mix of EDI practitioners, academics, HR professionals, and other people working across higher education and research that have the relevant expertise and can provide really supportive and developmental feedback to applicants. So if we go to the UK specifically, which I said commenced in 2005, we're kind of hovering around 1,000 Athena Swan Award holders there now. So 121 institutions hold awards, 872 by academic departments and professional units. And we see lots across bronze and silver and gold, including 2 gold institutions. We're at the stage now where all staff and all disciplines are included, and it has this intersectional gender equality lens built into the framework. An impact review or an independent evaluation that was conducted in 2019 found that there was a higher proportion of female staff overall in departments that held Athena Swan Awards, and a higher proportion of female academic staff in STEM disciplines and arts, humanities, social science, business, and law as well. They also found a higher proportion of undergraduate and postgraduate taught students. Additionally, they're seeing this trend towards more gender balanced senior level promotions, a greater percentage of women on job shortlists, and more appointments to women. And in 2020, a Women in Economics in the UK study showed evidence of links between Athena Swan Awards and reduced gender pay gap for senior roles. That same impact evaluation also conducted interviews with Athena Swan champions, so often academics who were leading self-assessment teams in their institutions. And they found among that cohort that 93% believed that the charter had had a positive effect on gender issues, that 78% believed that Athena Swan had had a positive impact on wider equality and diversity issues, and that 78% saw a positive impact on women's career progression. There was another study in 2016 which looked at the equality items that people would consider when deciding to take a post in a university. And they found that women rated holding an Athena Swan Award as the top equality item. So this was rated above childcare facilities and staff networks and some other considerations. And it's interesting, we often see departments and institutions that hold Athena Swan Awards will point to that in their recruitment materials as kind of a way to attract or signal some of the work that they're doing. So if we then go to Athena Swan Ireland, so I mentioned that Athena Swan started in Ireland in 2015 officially. We hold around 120 total awards at bronze and silver levels. All staff and all disciplines are included, and it has this gender equality lens with additional and intersecting equality areas built into the most recent iteration of the framework. So in Ireland, all of our 8 public universities participate, and we've seen some really positive change in those universities between 2015 when it was introduced and where we're at now. So the most recent data is from the end of 2022. But we went from having no presidents of universities in Ireland to half of the universities having a female president. Universities that have gender balanced executive management teams increased from 2 to 6, and ones that had gender balanced academic councils increased from just one of them to 7 of them. So we're certainly seeing a shift in the proportion of women in key decision-making roles in institutions. We've also seen positive changes for the representation of women in senior academic roles. So we have this increase in the proportion of professors, female professors from 19 to 30%. We've gone from 27 to 40% associate professors and 35 to 42% among senior lecturers. And then beyond the academic pipeline, we also have seen positive changes in professional roles too. So women in professional roles now occupy 46% of the highest pay grade compared to 31% previously. And then I will admit I'm not as familiar with the Australian framework, but there is some interesting studies that have been done there to compare Athena Swan award holders or SAGE award holders and non-award holders. So SAGE started the same year as Athena Swan Ireland, so in 2015. They have 42 subscribers with awards held at bronze, and they've actually just conferred their first silver awards to 2 institutions there. All staff and all disciplines are included. And again, it has this gender equality lens with additional and intersecting equality areas also built into the framework. So some of the impact that we have seen in Australia is that SAGE and SAGE accredited institutions are outperforming non-accredited institutions on some of these key gender equality indicators. So similar themes looking at leadership positions, so looking at board members, chairs, chief executives, heads of business units, we're seeing more gender balance there. We're also seeing that those institutions are more likely to have a formal policy or strategy for gender equality, for selection of their governing body, more likely to have taken action to address pay issues, and additionally that they provide more support for parents, carers, flexible workers compared to non-accredited institutions. So there's, I guess those are some of the kind of sector-wide impacts, but I also wanted to just take a moment to have a specific institution talk about the positive change that they have seen having achieved an Athena Swan Gold Award. So hopefully the technology cooperates, and I'll just play this for a couple moments. I'll leave that there. And then one other kind of comment that I wanted to draw upon and that I often kind of end presentations with was a quote that came from the impact review in the UK from a male head of department. And I think it's an important quote because it's an application process, and there is a lot of data analysis and action planning that goes into it, to kind of move away from that part of it and think about what it's all about. And he said, "We don't see this as a paper exercise. We see it as a process through which we can deliver real cultural and behavioral change, ensuring the attitudes and behaviors that support equality and diversity are embedded within our school, and everything we do is an essential part of achieving this cultural change." So I will leave it there. And yeah, as mentioned at the start, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was brilliant. We had some problems with
Okay.
the audio of the video, but if you're okay, we can share the link to the audience so they can listen to it afterwards. So I will check the chat box to see if we have any questions. But if not, I will start with one for you, if it's okay. From your experience, what conditions have to be in place for a country to start working with a charter like Athena Swan, and what are the incentives for the university to set up these kinds of frameworks?
Sure, it's a great question and it's a really important question. I think one of the really important things in the past that we have found is having that critical mass of institutions that want to take part. I think by its nature, because you're looking at data and thinking about appropriate interventions and actions, because it's a system that relies on peer review, it's really good when a group of institutions want to come together and all decide that they want to take part in Athena Swan. So for example, in Cyprus, we have 6 institutions who have decided that they want to pilot it. In Ireland, we started with, it was around 20 institutions. And then of course, other countries that might be much bigger, like in Australia or Canada, it's a bit bigger. But I think that's an important first step, is that it's not just one institution, but that collective sector, more sector-wide approach. The other thing is, I think the senior commitment piece is really important. One thing that we find is that institutions love the idea of an award, particularly if it's, has some sort of bronze, silver, or gold attached to it. But it's really important for senior leaders to understand the resourcing and time and commitment that will be involved in going through the framework. So I think where possible, that the most senior people in an institution have an understanding of what they're committing to. But I think that that at the same time, that award structure can kind of link to the incentive piece as well. So we do find that although institutions are collaborative and working together, there is a little bit of competition as well, because they want to achieve a bronze award or they want to achieve a silver award. I think in terms of incentives, it really depends on the country. Sometimes we find that the sort of will to take part in Athena Swan is because it's felt that it's the right thing to do. There have been really entrenched equality challenges that institutions want to address. But we also have in Ireland, for example, research funders have said that they expect that they require institutions to take part to remain eligible for research funding. So there's different models and different approaches for, I guess, enabling and encouraging institutions to take part.
Yes, completely agree. I think it was brilliant for Athena Swan to put, I mean, for the UK scientific ecosystem to recognize this charter and put it as a prerequisite to access to funds. I think that was brilliant in a way that it makes, it puts another level of importance to these kinds of policies. And hopefully, I don't know if that is the case for all of the charters that you mentioned. I think it isn't, but this is definitely a very big incentive for higher education institutions and research centers to focus on these equality policies. We have a question from Barbara, who is asking, how can we start a similar initiative in Mexico?
So it would depend. So there are different ways. I guess if a group of institutions wanted to approach Advance HE, they could, and it usually depends on what kind of funding is available. So it's a hard question to answer, but we've done it in different ways. Sometimes we've partnered with the British Council to run a pilot program. Sometimes we have partnered with a funding agency in a country to run a pilot program. Other times, groups of institutions have come together to sign up to become members of Advanced HE, and then a program of work is developed that way. But in any case, do get in touch if you think that institutions or there's an institution that would be interested in this type of work. Yeah, send us an email.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, only to add to this answer, we are part of holding these webinars is sharing best practices from the UK. So this is one of the starting points, like having the knowledge out there and then start to map the next actions in order to put in place these kinds of activities. Brazil has done it very well with their gender equality framework. Advanced HG has been working with us, with the British Council in several higher education institutions over there, and they're currently piloting in. So this experience will be also very beneficial for the Mexico for us. We have another question from Jamina Silva. She's asking, do you think that this tool requires some adjustment to be applied in Latin American countries?
I think it probably would require some sort of adjustment or contextualization. We find that whenever Athena Swan starts in another country, that it requires some sort of adjustment, I guess. Sometimes those can be really big changes to something in the framework, and sometimes it's very nuanced. It might be just around language or specific data sets or depend on where the sector is at. What we have done is we usually set up some sort of committee or advisory group, which is made up of representatives from the institutions so that they can advise on making sure that a framework is fit for purpose in the sector that it runs in.
Great, thank you, Sarah. A next question for Asenet Cano. What has been the impact of the Athena Swan program in the community in relation to gender equality?
So I make sure I understand your question. I guess there's kind of the general impacts that I talked about from the impact review, which are around seeing kind of an increase in the proportion of women in senior academic roles. Institutions, we'll see impacts will be really tied to specific institutions. So some of the things that we have seen come out of individual Irish institutions have ranged from the changes in the representation in particular parts of the academic or professional pipeline. But we've seen lots of other impacts as well. So things like staff reporting much better supports when they go on and return from family leave, kind of improvements around access to, say, flexible working opportunities that are supported, improved promotions processes. There's quite a big body of work around kind of specific impacts dependent to each institution. I could send maybe when we circulate the slides and the video, send some links to some of those reviews. That would be more helpful.
That will be great. Yes, we will highly appreciate that, Sarah. Thank you so much. We have another question from Sarah Murtak. What are the greatest challenges around embedding the charter in an institution?
I think the biggest challenge is always going to be resourcing. Institutions have finite resources. We know that people are often really stretched. Academics often, are trying to meet teaching and research and service requirements. And I think sometimes kind of getting an equality charter framework off the ground and working effectively, it does take time and resourcing. And I think having a really established program in an institution can't just rely on people volunteering their time. An institution has to be willing to put in place some of the resources and governance to make it work effectively.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a very important point of institutional buy-in and recognizing all the time that needs to be put into these kinds of initiatives. And I think it's a way of not continuing with reproducing discrimination, willing to think that women will do all the work voluntarily. So it's very, very important to recognize time, to recognize all the capacity that has to be going on for making a charter like Athena Swan happening. And I don't see any more questions on the chat, Sarah, but I have a final question. Well, no, Alicia Leila just popped out a question, so I will leave my question till the end. How do you make a program active in educational institutions?
So it's depended. It depends once it's kind of available in a particular country. So I spoke a little bit about how different countries have worked with or approached Advance HE to get an Athena Swan up and running. But then, so I guess there's different access models, and yeah, it will really depend. It will depend on what sort of model a particular country takes. So in some cases, an institution can become a member of Advance HE and take part in the Athena Swan framework. Other times when we've partnered with a particular organization to run a pilot program, institutions can get involved because it's been funded for them and they commit to the principles and then they receive support to be able to undertake the framework. So there's not a straight answer, I guess, to that question. It really depends on the program.
Thank you, Sarah. And well, my final question is, from your perspective, what is the value of having an Athena Swan charter versus not having this national unifying charter and let each higher education institution or research center work on their own standards and their own gender equality plans?
I think there's a few things that pop out to me. The first, I think, is what I think sets Athena Swan apart is that system of peer review and accreditation. So the institutions aren't just developing an action plan that they implement themselves. I think that external peer review helps really strengthen the work. I think the institutions going at it together helps them tackle shared challenges. And also, like, one of the things that we see really often is an institution will pilot an initiative. So for example, in Ireland, an institution piloted or introduced this program of support. It was a research grant for returning for women returning from maternity leave to start up their research when they came back. And but now that's common across the sector, and that's because they see that in each other's Athena Swan submissions and think, oh, well, they're offering that, we should do something similar. So it really, I think, pushes them towards progress. It's that sharing of good practice across the framework means people are, taking up good supportive initiatives.
Yeah, I personally think it's a brilliant idea. And I'm a really, really big fan of Athena Swan and everything you have achieved. And a proof that is impactful and it's really useful is that many other countries around the world are taking it as an example. And I love that part of that you mentioned that is globally comparable, but is locally contextualized, which is also really important to take into account national needs and the local context to make something really successful and impactful, Sarah. So I think we're ending ahead of time. If no one else has any question or comment, feel free to open your mic and to thank Sarah, or I don't know, share something about that is happening in your institutions. We know we have an audience from all over Latin America. We have many researchers from Mexico and also from Peru that are joining us today. And well, if no one wants to make a comment, I just wanted to let you know that we will share the presentation after also the link to the video that Sarah presented. And we will appreciate if you let us know what are your thoughts about these sessions by completing a survey that will be sent to you by email as well. And we will share the QR code right now. It's a very short survey that will give us insights of the session. Please feel free to share with us any other topics that you would like to see from us. And thank you again for joining us today, and hope to see you in our next edition.